To prevent workers from fleeing, the military took extreme measures. There was a guy who had his hands and feet bound with 7 people with rope, says Muang, who met the man while interviewing the villagers who had fled to the Thai border. They were put in a pit to keep them from running away. It was Muang who first brought the idea of suing the oil companies to Attorney Terry Collingsworth, then an AFL-CIO representative in Nepal and a leader of the Washington, D.C.-based International Labor Rights Fund. Collingsworth, together with Burmese activists, decided to try using an obscure 1789 law known as the Alien Tort Claims Act, which grants non-citizens access to U.S. courts in cases involving violations of international law. That act had been used before to prosecute torture by foreign military officers, but it had yet to be successfully used against a corporation whose officers hadn't personally perpetrated the abuses. In 1996, Collingsworth and the Labor Rights Fund used it to sue California-based Unocal on behalf of 4 Burmese villagers for encouraging and profiting from murder, torture, rape, and slavery in Burma. About a month later, Earth Rights International filed a similar lawsuit on behalf of 14 others, targeting Unocal, Total, and the state-run Burmese and Thai gas companies. The plaintiffs in both cases remain anonymous to protect them from retaliation, although the court ruled that it had no jurisdiction over the foreign companies. The cases, remarkably, went forward against Unocal and are now being considered together in California and federal courts. The claims against Unocal are straightforward. The villagers argue that because the California company was a business partner of the Burmese government, whose military is notorious for using forced labor, the company is responsible for the systematic human rights violations the military committed in order to complete the company's pipeline. While charging an American company with slavery is controversial, there's nothing unusual in American courts holding a company responsible for the acts of its business partner, and international criminal tribunals have often held individuals responsible for aiding and abetting international crimes like genocide. Either of these grounds could allow the court to rule in the villagers' favor, forcing Unocal to face a trial. On June 17th, after years of legal wrangling, during which the case was dismissed, reinstated, and then appealed, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit will reconsider whether the company can be held responsible for forced labor and murder committed by the Burmese military in connection with the pipeline. Its decision will have implications far beyond Unocal and the Burmese villagers. Although the Alien Tort Claims Act, originally enacted to prosecute piracy, lay dormant for almost 2 centuries, human rights and labor activists are increasingly using it to charge American corporations with egregious violations of international law. The Labor Rights Fund alone has half a dozen such cases pending in federal courts around the country, claiming human rights abuses by ExxonMobil in Indonesia, Coca-Cola in Colombia, and Del Monte in Guatemala. Among others, the New York-based Center for Constitutional Rights has used the law to charge Royal Dutch Shell and Chevron Texaco with complicity in murder and military attacks in connection with their oil projects in Nigeria. The rising tide of these cases has alarmed American corporations. They are fighting back hard, filing briefs in support of the defendants, and lobbying Congress to repeal or amend the Alien Tort Claims Act. Still, most courts' substantive decisions have favored the plaintiffs, and the cases are slowly marching ahead, with the case against Unocal taking the lead, and thus promising to set a precedent. If the Ninth Circuit rules that Unocal must face trial for collusion in murder, torture, rape, and slavery, it will confirm that human rights activists have hit upon a powerful tool for holding corporations legally accountable for profiting off of the most despicable practices of abusive governments overseas. The U.S. government is working to prevent that. In May, Attorney General John Ashcroft filed a brief with the Ninth Circuit Court denouncing the villagers' attempt to use the Alien Tort Law to sue Unocal, and arguing that every court that has allowed such claims for the past 20 years has been wrong. In a sweeping argument against legal accountability for human rights violations, the administration argues that all suits filed under that law should be dismissed because they interfere with U.S. foreign policy and undermine America's war on terrorism. Kenneth Roth, director of Human Rights Watch, calls Ashcroft's intervention a craven attempt to protect human rights abusers. So far, no court has endorsed the Justice Department's view. UNICAL has fought this case every step of the way, refusing to acknowledge even basic facts surrounding the pipeline's construction. The company denies, for example, that under its contract with the state-owned Burmese gas company, the government had pledged to provide security for the pipeline. Yet UNICAL's own documents, produced for the lawsuit, state that the government of Myanmar is responsible for protecting the pipeline. UNICAL's representative in Burma told the U.S. Embassy that the companies have hired the Burmese military to provide security for the project. Additional documents reveal that UNICAL's officials on the pipeline project held daily meetings with Army commanders to tell them where they needed roads, military installations, and security. And villagers have testified that UNICAL officials regularly visited the pipeline site. UNICAL claims that it was unaware that the Burmese military regularly used forced labor, yet UNICAL's own consultants warned the company, according to court documents, that throughout Burma the government habitually makes use of forced labor to construct roads. Even the U.S. State Department reported, at least as early as 1991, that the military government routinely uses forced labor. The United Nations issued more warnings of serious human rights abuses in 1995. With the evidence mounting, Texaco, which had large investments in a Burma gas field, pulled out of the country in 1997, but UNICAL retained a 28% interest in the pipeline. And then UNICAL President John Emil was defiant. At a January 1995 meeting with the human rights organizations, he had argued that locals were threatening sabotage, adding, "If you threaten the pipeline, there's gonna be more military. If forced labor goes hand in glove with the military, yes, there will be more forced labor. For every threat to the pipeline, there will be a reaction." If there remained any doubt, in March of that year, UNICAL's Burma representative, Joel Robinson, confirmed that he had received information from human rights groups that depicted in more detail than I have ever seen before the increased encroachment of the Burmese military's activities into the villages of the pipeline area. Robinson concluded that UNICAL's insistence that the military had not used forced labor on the company's behalf may not withstand much scrutiny. By the end of 1995, UNICAL consultant John Haseman, a former military attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Rangoon, added to the chorus in a report to UNICAL. Based on my 3 years of service in Burma, my continuous contacts in the region since then, and my knowledge of the situation there, my conclusion is that egregious human rights violations have occurred and are occurring now in southern Burma. He told UNICAL the most common are forced relocation without compensation of families from land near along the pipeline route, forced labor to work on infrastructure projects supporting the pipeline, and imprisonment and/or execution by the army of those opposing such actions. Exactly the core charges of the plaintiffs. UNICAL, Haseman continues, by seeming to have accepted the Burmese military's version of events, appears at best naive and at worst willing to partner in the situation. Charles G. Hancock's Be Helpful, Not Hurtful movie and TV show. Send this to any and or all of the following people: Bill and Melinda Gates, Warren Buffett, Peter Chernin, Al Gore, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton. I cannot go public with this until I am a nonprofit and the website is capable of taking donations and selling raffle tickets.